Before we get into the technical material behind architecting solutions in AWS, let's talk a little bit about some logistics associated with the exam itself. To start off with, when you take the exam, there are going to be 65 questions, and you're going to have 130 minutes to complete it. That might sound like a lot of time. However, a lot of the questions are going to be scenario-based, and it will take a little bit of time to read through them and to look at all of the different answer choices to make sure that you understand the full breadth and depth of what the question is asking. And so, it is in your best interest to keep an eye on how much time you have left while you are actually taking the exam. Let's follow that up with the fact that every question is going to be multiple choice. Questions that only have 4 answer choices are going to give you radio buttons to choose from, where you can only pick one as the correct answer. There will also be multiple response questions. Those will have 5 or 6 answer choices, and those change the user interface on the exam away from radio buttons into checkboxes. And so you'll have to make sure that you check the correct number of answers. The question itself will be very clear. It will say select 2 or select 3 when you are in the middle of a multiple response question. This next number is somewhat irrelevant because it's really hard to actually calculate what it means to you while you're taking the exam itself. In order to get a passing score on the exam, you need to end up with 750 or higher out of 1,000. However, there isn't just an easy way for you to figure out that this might mean 75% of the correct answers or not, because every question has a variable score associated with it according to the difficulty of the question. In addition to that, there will be 15 questions out of the 65 that are not scored at all. They're not worth anything even if you get them right. This is how AWS is able to roll new questions that have not been fully tested into the exam pool. Now, our final number, and this is important, is that there's no penalty for guessing. What this means to you is that it's in your best interest to make sure you have answered all 65 questions, even if it is just a wild guess. Now let's talk about a couple of strategies that you can employ while you are taking the exam itself. The first of these, and I talk about this in every exam course that I teach for AWS, it's more important to know why the wrong answer is wrong than to know why the right answer is right. And I can't emphasize this enough. What this does is this helps you to build skills in eliminating incorrect answer choices. There will be questions out of the 65 that you are not fully sure about. Maybe it is a service that you haven't used before, or an architectural pattern that you never read about. If you have the ability to eliminate even 1 out of 4 answer choices, it makes it that much easier to guess with the remaining 3. And if you can eliminate 2 out of 4, your chances of getting the question right have just jumped up significantly. The second tip is to read AWS documentation. White papers, such as the Well-Architected Framework, technical guides, user guides, blog posts. Because in all of this documentation, there is going to be commonly used words and phrases and technical terms. These terms, this terminology, are all going to be showing up on the exam question scenarios in a way that is consistent with the documentation. And if you've read the documentation and you understand and are familiar with these terms, it's going to make it that much easier to understand what each question is asking you to do. My third tip is to not spend too much time on any single question. Don't spin your wheels. You have the ability to flag any question and come back to it later. If you read through a question and you realize immediately that you have no idea what it's asking, or if the answer choices don't look like anything that you would have picked, flag it right away. Save it for your second round through the questions. If nothing else, you might come to a question later on in the exam that helps to spark a memory that makes it easier to come back and answer this one correctly later. My fourth tip is to don't worry about memorizing number-based details for the AWS ecosystem. The exam's not going to ask you questions based on specific numbers, capacities, or limits. Anything that you could look up in documentation in 30 seconds, you're not going to be asked questions about it. So don't bother with the maximum compute power for an EC2 instance or the maximum throughput from one service to another, because these types of questions don't usually fall under the domain of an architect who's acting at the associate level in AWS. Now the final tip, and I'm going to leave this one as optional, and this is something that I've heard from a number of places and been corroborated by a number of individuals that I've spoken to personally, is that you should read the answer choices before you read the question. That way, while you're reading the question, you already have an idea of what the answers are trying to point you towards as far as which elements of the question are the most important. In these next three sections, we're going to talk about the exam guide for the Solutions Architect Associate exam. This exam guide is provided directly from AWS, and you can download it as a PDF. It's broken up into three main parts. The first of these is the introduction, followed by the target candidate description. These two parts together could collectively be read and viewed as a sort of job description, where AWS is telling you the types of tasks that you would perform as a solutions architect and the knowledge and experience that you need to have in order to qualify for that job or pass the exam. The third part of the exam guide is the exam content itself, where it walks through the 4 exam question domains along with an outline and subpoints for each of them. So let's take a look at the introduction for the exam guide. This one is part of that job description section, and this is the part where it describes for you the types of tasks that you would perform if this was your job. And all of these are going to have the same prefix, validates a candidate's ability to. And for this first one, use AWS technologies to design solutions based on the AWS well-architected framework. This entire exam is based on the well-architected framework. The well-architected framework white papers are absolutely hard requirements to be able to take and pass this exam. You will need to read the main white paper as well as the 4 individual pillar white papers that are covered in the 4 question domains on this exam. But I want you to notice that I've highlighted a couple of words. First off is use. Use AWS technologies. It's more than just understanding from a documentation perspective where they fit. It means you actually need to know how to work with them. The second word that I've highlighted is design. That is a keyword for this particular exam. There are other keywords that we're going to talk about a little bit later in this module. But this word design means all you have to do is be able to translate from a technical requirement into a service or feature recommendation. Our second point is to design solutions that incorporate AWS services to meet current business requirements and future projected needs. This is a little bit different in that we're not just talking about technical requirements anymore. We're actually going a step earlier in that entire product pipeline and looking at business requirements instead. This means we're going to need to understand things like business continuity, where it isn't always provided as a straight technical requirement. Our third point is to design architectures that are secure, resilient, high-performing, and cost-optimized. These apply exactly to the 4 question domains for this exam, and they are exactly 4 pillars of the well-architected framework. These are the 4 that you are going to want to make sure that you've read those individual pillar white papers on. And for our final section, we have review existing solutions and determine improvements. So all of those other points were for designing new infrastructure or architectures. This exam scope is also going to include the ability to take an existing infrastructure and determine how to make it better in the context of a single pillar of that well-architected framework. In this next part of the exam guide, we're going to look at the target candidate description, which is provided as a single sentence. But there's an awful lot that we can learn about the breadth and depth of this exam by going through that sentence. The first phrase in the sentence is at least 1 year of hands-on experience. And this is where I believe the SAA C03 version of the exam diverges a little bit from the previous incarnations. We are going to spend a lot of our discussions talking about hands-on experience. What does this mean? It means that when you make an architectural recommendation, that you need to understand that there are operational ramifications of those decisions that you've made. If all you've done is read technical guides and user guides and white papers, you can absolutely learn how to translate from a technical requirement into an architectural recommendation with services and features. But without that hands-on experience, can you actually understand what you are committing other teams to having to do in terms of operations? Those operations themselves may actually have security implications, or cost implications, or performance implications, or reliability implications. This hands-on experience and the understanding of how operations work in AWS is going to be one of the focuses of the material that we're going to be going through, where we don't just look at that translation, we also look at what the downstream effects are. So the rest of this sentence includes designing cloud solutions. So you've got at least 1 year experience designing cloud solutions. Great. But the hands-on being added into the middle of that means that you didn't just do it on paper. You were in the AWS console. You were using the command line interface or the SDK and actually doing some of these tasks yourself so that you understand the level of effort that's involved. And then we follow this up with that use AWS services. This is an important phrase in this sentence in the context of this exam, because what it's telling you is that you are not going to be asked questions about custom solutions on this exam that would lead you away from utilizing AWS offerings. And so, from a strategy perspective, when you're reading through a question, and you have a number of answers where one answer utilizes a managed solution in AWS, where AWS does all the operations for you. And another answer choice is to deploy a similar feature, but to do it on EC2 and then manage it yourself as the customer. The managed solution is almost always going to be the correct answer on this exam. As you get into other exams that are more difficult, like specialty certs and the pro-level certs, those custom solutions do end up becoming more prevalent and can be the correct answer, but that's not going to be the focus of this particular exam. The final part of the exam guide is the majority of the information, but we are just going to introduce it here because we're going to spend the rest of this course talking about the information contained in all of those outlines. This part of the exam guide is the list of question domains and what percentage of questions represent each of those domains on the exam itself. The biggest change between the previous version of the exam and this one is that security is now front and center with the highest percentage of any of the question domains. This follows exactly the AWS commitment to security as their highest priority. It also follows customers recognizing that security does need to be placed at that higher priority ahead of other parts of solutions architecture. And so our other three question domains are to design resilient architectures at 26%, design high-performing architectures at 24%, and then cost-optimized architectures at 20%. And as you can see, we have security, reliability, performance efficiency, and cost optimization, which are exactly 4 pillars of the well-architected framework represented on this exam. The other 2 pillars, operational excellence and sustainability, are not represented here at this time. And so we don't have to cover them in the same level of detail as we do those other 4 pillars. I'd also like to take a look at the overall AWS certification landscape and explain the keywords that I like to use in order to be able to separate them from each other. The first exam at the foundational level is called Cloud Practitioner. And out of our 5 keywords, recognize, design, implement, operate, and troubleshoot, the only one represented here is the word recognize. You don't have to design anything, you don't have to operate, you don't have to troubleshoot. It's simply a matter of recognizing technical terms and phrases and concepts that are part of the AWS ecosystem. Next, we have the associate level certifications, represented by this exam, Solutions Architect, Developer, and SysOps Administrator. And as you can see, these have a pretty wide range of representation across those different action words. All of them have recognize, but only Solutions Architect and Developer use the word design. Only Developer and SysOps Admin use the word implement, and then SysOps is represented alone in the words operate, and then troubleshoot, Developer has a little bit of effort there as well. But notice Solutions Architect is really only using the word design. What I am going to do in this course, however, is we're going to talk a little bit about those other action words of implement and operate, because the more you understand there, the better you will be as a solutions architect. The next section of exams are the professional exams, Solutions Architect Pro and DevOps Engineer Pro. And you can see these two have a different cross-section of the action words. One big difference between Solutions Architect associate and professional is that professional still has troubleshooting as part of the scope of the exam. And then for DevOps engineer, it's everything except for design. The final section of the certification landscape are the various specialty certs. And these tend to have an almost full coverage of all of these different action words, which can make them very challenging. For example, if we look at the Advanced Network Specialty Cert, all 5 of the action words are represented here, which means you need to act as a network architect, but also as a network administrator and as a network security professional, and have the ability to troubleshoot a broken network and fix it appropriately. Other specialty certs, like security, also include all 5 of these action words, and that can make them quite difficult when it comes time to actually take those exams, because you need to have a strong mixture of skill sets. Welcome to Lesson 1. In this lesson, I will introduce the Solutions Architect Associate exam and cover some important logistics for the exam itself. I will discuss the exam guide and how it can be studied for hints on exam question patterns and covered services. We will finish with a discussion on the AWS certification landscape and learn where the Solutions Architect Associate exam fits.